Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar entitled Where Will I Go? Comparing the different housing options. All right, so it looks like there's still some people trickling in, but we're going to get started. Just a couple of housekeeping notes, just to let you know, your cameras, your mics are not audible or visible right now, so relax. We can't see you or hear you, but there is a way for you to communicate with us, and that is through the Q&A section. So depending on whether you're on your phone or if you are on a laptop or a tablet, you should be able to see a little question mark, which will allow you to ask questions throughout the presentation. I'm happy to stop as we hear questions about the topics that I'm covering, and also we'll have some open Q&A at the end. Thirdly, you may have seen that tonight I am offering a beautiful pair of Toronto Scepters tickets. The Toronto Scepters are our most recent professional hockey team, professional women's hockey league team. They play at the Exhibition Center, and so one lucky winner who's here with us tonight will be going home with a pair of tickets to the April 29th game versus New York. So if that's not something you're interested in, please let me know in the Q&A and we'll keep your name out of the draw. But it's a great experience of Toronto hockey. So I'm happy to share that with someone tonight. Lastly, there's no need to take notes. I will be sending the recording as well as the slide deck and a number of handouts. So you can look out for that email tomorrow. So feel free if you want to just relax and listen in. So there should be, there should be a poll coming up that says, are you interested in winning the Toronto Scepter ticket? So feel free to do that. If you can see that in the poll section, please feel free to answer that question and we'll do a draw at the end of tonight. All right, so let's get into it. So tonight is really about thinking about the variety of options that exist for seniors who are moving from a home that they're thinking about. And, you know, in my job as, oh, I think we're going ahead too far. All right, so the big question is, where will I live? And for those of you who don't know me, I started a company called Seamless Rightsizing. And what Seamless Rightsizing is full service real estate for older adults and asking, and it allows, sorry, my slides are moving. It really does allow people to take the overwhelm out of the moving process. And the biggest thing I have found when working with seniors is that the biggest question, there's two big questions. One is, what do I do with all my stuff? And second is, where will I go? And so today we're going to be talking about that. You may be in a stage in your right sizing process where you're not even sure if it's time for you. So tomorrow in your email, you can look out for a checklist that goes through some questions that are going to help you consider whether or not it is time to start thinking about right sizing. It might be something that you're being very proactive about, and it's something that's a decade or 5 years down the line, or maybe you're really realizing that it might be time. And so this checklist is intended to help you decide for yourself if it might be time to right size. So you can look out for that in your email tomorrow. All right, so where will I live? This, unfortunately, is one of the questions that is so absolutely overwhelming. And to be honest, part of the reason this is overwhelming is because there are many options. You know, I often work with clients who say, Anuja, I know I can't live here, but I can't imagine living somewhere else. You know, they may have been in that home for sometimes 20, 30, 40 plus years. And so the thought of moving to a new place is overwhelming. And then secondly, trying to understand what the best place is for them. So we're going to talk about 8 different types of housing options tonight. Obviously, this is not an all-inclusive list. There are alternative options that exist, but I really wanted to cover the most popular ones, the ones that are most common, and talk about a few things. For each one, you know, we're going to talk about the pros, the cons, and some of the costs related to it. So, you know, those are some of the things we're going to talk about. What I can say is that, you know, it's not a one size fits all solution. Everyone's situation is quite different. So one person sitting here listening to me tonight is going to have a very different context and situation, and the solution for them is not the same for someone else who's listening. So my goal today is really to give you a rough overview, to start helping you think about what some of those options might be. And then I think, with everyone's situation in mind, is trying to narrow down what the right option might be for you. So the 8 things that we're going to cover tonight are aging in place, so staying where you are, leaving your home and purchasing a condo, renting a condo, 2 options around retirement homes, so independent living and assisted living, 6, multi-generational living, 7th, moving to a smaller home or townhouse, and 8th being co-housing. So we're going to get into some of those. Like I said, I am going to give you a lot of information tonight, so you will get a follow-up with all the handouts tomorrow in your email. All right. So aging in place. So aging in place means that you're staying in your current home and making it safer. And this is what we would say is a very popular choice. 81% of seniors would prefer to age in their current residence. And this may be you, right? There's a lot of very big benefits of staying in your current home. So those would be things like being really familiar with where you are, not just the home itself, but the neighborhood, where the grocery store is, who your neighbors are. So there's some familiarity with the surroundings. There's no working on moving costs. So there is no cost of selling your home or physically moving, or some of the legal costs that come around with moving. Next, you can modify your home for accessibility. So obviously there are ways to talk about how to make your current home more accessible. And lastly, and probably one of the biggest things, is that people feel a sense of independence staying in their home. We have lived through different generations, and there is a generation where home ownership, particularly a detached home with a garage, with the driveway, this was the dream that many people have worked towards. And so there is a sense of independence and also identity that comes along with potentially aging in your home. The downside is that what some of you may be experiencing is that it is significantly stressful. So maintenance, things like shoveling, we're just coming off a pretty snowy winter, mowing the lawn, dealing with the garden, all of those things, even just maintaining such a large space can be very stressful. Safety is also an issue. So there are absolutely ways to improve a home for accessibility, but there always can be increased safety issues in a larger home. Lastly, there is stress of costs. So there's a lot of people, there's a term called house poor, and we talk about that when we're talking about young people, where what that means is that a lot of our money is tied up in these homes. And so while someone may have a fully paid off home, there may be some stress related to spending a lot of money on a trip or potential costs down the road. And so those heavy costs and having a lot of money tied up in our home can add stress for people. There is absolutely a risk of isolation. So sometimes there is a familiar surrounding, but a lot of those neighbors who lived there 10, 15, 5 years ago are moving away, right, for different reasons. And so there can be a big sense of isolation because sometimes in these homes, it requires the individual to go out for any socialization. So that can be a big risk of isolation. And then someone may require in-home care services. So that would be some of the downsides of staying and aging in place. The costs really vary. So here we have like $2,500 to upwards of $7,000. And the cost would be potentially a mortgage if the house isn't paid off, property taxes, maintenance costs, especially if someone is coming in to do that shoveling and that lawn mowing and those sorts of things, utilities, and then potentially paying for home care. All right, so we're going to do a bit of a case study. We're going to talk about Raj and Priya. So Raj and Priya are a couple. They're 72 and 69. They currently own their home in Mississauga, which is worth about $1 million. Their income is about $4,500 a month through CPP and OAS. And some of the challenges for them is that they really struggle with home maintenance. the increasing property taxes, which we know keep going up, and they're having some mobility issues. And so they're looking to spend about $3,000 to $4,000 a month. And so a solution for them is to stay in their home. So they're going to stay in their home, but they're going to make some modifications. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the available tax credits, some of the programs that are available in Ontario today, and I will give you a handout that summarizes those at the end. So there is Ontario Seniors Home Safety Tax Credit. So that allows folks to include things like install things like grab bars, a stair lift potentially, or anything that might be needed to improve the safety in the home. They're also going to use the Ontario Property Tax Credit, which is up to $500 a year, depending on income, to help with their property taxes. And they are going to look at in-home care services, but they're also going to be using some family support and community programs to keep those costs low. So for them, for Raj and Priya, their estimated monthly costs after the support that they're receiving is about $2,000 to $3,000. And again, they're covering their property tax, utilities, and some minor maintenance. So this is really great for a senior or a couple who prefer staying in their family home and may have the financial capability of staying there and maybe some other support. All right. Next up, we're going to talk about a very popular option for seniors who might be downsizing or right-sizing, as I like to call it, and that's moving from a home into purchasing a condo. So these condo apartments are very popular. About 55% of seniors move into a condo, and there's some reasons for that. One, it keeps people in the real estate market, so you continue to build equities, and so the price of the condo today should be less than when someone would be going to sell, or over the years the equity would be building. Definitely lower maintenance than a house. So often condos are much smaller than homes people live in, and the common areas are covered by the condo corporation. The other pros or benefits of a condo apartment is that they often include a lot of amenities like pools and gyms. And they also, especially those that are geared towards seniors, have security features. So a fob is required to get into the building. Sometimes there's 24-hour concierge. So those things really add to a sense of safety and security for older adults. And the big thing, often these condo apartments are single level, so no one needs to deal with stairs. So not needing to deal with stairs like you would if you moved to a smaller home or a townhouse with multiple levels, these condo apartments really allow for a little bit more security and comfort because they're often on one level. Some of the downsides of a condo. So I'm sure many of us on here have heard of condo fees. So condominium fees are those fees that all the residents pay per month. All the owners, I should say, pay per month to cover things like the elevator, the common areas like the gym and the pool that we talked about, the hallways, the carpeting, the lights being on in those common areas. All of those things are contributed by the owners through condo fees to help run the building, basically. Those condo fees really are dependent on a couple of things. And the biggest thing they're dependent on is square footage. So generally it's, let's say 70 cents a square foot is a number I could throw out there. It varies by building and the age of the building, but those condo fees are dependent on how big your unit is. So someone with a 3-bedroom, 1,200 square foot unit is going to be paying higher condo fees than someone with a 600 square foot unit. So that's one of the downsides, obviously, is that those condo fees can run high, and they can also change over time. And so that's really important to remember. As part of a condo, there are also some significant bylaws and rules around pets, around what you can do on your balcony, around what changes you can make inside your unit. And so some of those can be a bit of a downside for people who want to have more independence. There can be market fluctuations. One thing we've seen in our current market is that condo prices have actually gone down a little bit because there is this huge influx of inventory since COVID. And so it's a great time to buy a condo, but for anyone looking to sell a condo right now, there can be these fluctuations because of the amount of inventory, particularly in the GTA. So the cost of doing that, again, could be anywhere from 3,500 is a sort of a rough number if we're including a mortgage, property taxes, condo fees. So that gives you a bit of a sense of what that might look like. We're going to talk about Frank today. So Frank currently owns a home in Mississauga. He wants to sell and he wants to get right-sized into a condo. So his income right now is $3,500 a month, which is his CPP, his OAS, and his a small pension from work. So he lives on his own, and really for him, he doesn't want to deal with the home maintenance. He really wants some independence, and his budget is $3,500 a month. So the solution for him, he sells his house for $1 million, buys a condo for 700,000, which gives him, after closing costs, about 250,000 in savings, and uses some of that, some of those tax credits, the senior home safety tax credit, to do some upgrades. And he also uses OESP, which gives him some savings on hydro, and I'll talk about that in a bit. The rest he does, he invests, and he uses the sale profits, that 250,000, working with his financial planner to start supplementing by getting dividends over the months that pass by investing it. So again, for him, his estimated monthly cost after the support he receives is about $1,500. So the reason that is because he's living in this condo mortgage free. He used the money, he owned his own home outright. So he is using that money to he's using that money to pay off, and he bought it outright, so he doesn't have a mortgage. And then he's using it. The rest of the costs really come down to the property taxes, the condo fees, and some of the utilities. So this really works for a senior who wants some independence. But he wants to build equity still, and he is someone who has a financial buffer. And the reason, condo fees are interesting and something that, you really want to get help with is because every building is slightly different. Those condo fees cover very different things in one building than in another. So some condos I'm familiar with, really just cover those basic elements. Some include internet, some include your hydro, your heat, your cable, all these other things. So it's important to really pay attention to not just the value of those condo fees, but what they cover. And so this is a really great option. One of my favorite things to say is, getting a smaller home can lead to a bigger life. And my experience was first with my parents, who did move from, the 4-bedroom home into a condo. And that's exactly what happened for them. They can quickly book a trip, drop their bags, not have to worry about maintenance, not have to worry about the security of their unit, and really be a lot more free. So that's why I think this is one of the reasons this is such an appealing option for so many people. Sorry. The third option we have is a rented condo. And this is something I do often suggest to clients who are right-sizing. There's a lot of benefits to renting versus possibly purchasing. And so it might be something that's worth considering. The one thing I will say is that the cost of renting a condo is still quite high. In Mississauga, a 1-bedroom condo rents upward from $2,000 and up, depending on the type of unit, and that's for a 1-bedroom condo. So there is some downside. It's still costly, but the good news is that there's no long-term financial commitment, right? Someone who can budget and work with a planner or work with an agent to figure out, what we can afford. It really does provide a little bit of predictability in terms of what the commitment is. Again, less maintenance, pack up and go. This idea of really having a lot more freedom and ability to move, I should say, is one of the most appealing things about a condo. You still get the benefits of the security features, the amenities, and again, we're often talking about one level. There are condos that are 2-story, but most often they're one level. Some of the downsides though, so no longer are we building equity in the real estate market. No longer are we having that appreciating asset, which should be appreciating, especially now. No longer do we have that. There is rent control currently in Ontario. So for units that were built before 2017, once there is a set rent, it can only be increased by a certain amount, usually 1% to 2% per year. Newer condos that were built after that time aren't subject to rent control. And so you've maybe heard the horror stories in the news where, your landlords are saying your rent was, $2,000, and if you want to stay, it's going to be $3,000. And so those newer units aren't protected by rent control as the ones that were built before that time. Again, we may have possible restrictions like pets and renovations, and obviously you'd be more restricted because it is a rented condo. And then lastly, there is a little bit less predictability. So in Ontario, if you are renting a unit, a house, a unit in a building, if the landlord is looking to move in or looking to have a direct family member move in, they can ask you to leave. They can't ask you to leave legally for any other reason unless they're moving in or that one of their direct family members is moving in. But that sometimes happens where someone moves back to the city and hey, sorry, Nuja, I need my unit back. You need to move. And so it can feel a little less secure than owning. Again, costs can run from anywhere $2,000 and up, and that would include your rent and the utilities. So one of the things that often people think about, and we will be talking about in depth, I will tell you about our next webinar, which will be focused entirely on retirement homes. There's two types of living that we're going to talk about in retirement homes. The first one being independent living. So this is where you are able to rent or buy an independent living apartment in a retirement home. So there's a number of retirement homes in Mississauga, for example, where they have independent living apartments. And so in those apartments, you can stay in these units, have some access to the services of the retirement home itself, but have a kitchen, have your own space, and not necessarily have to engage as much in the services in the home itself. So meals and housekeeping can be included, which is a good option for people. There can be social activities and healthcare support should you need it. And of course, it's safe and accessible. Often people who are not ready or require the full assisted living experience move into independent living because it eases the transition eventually to potentially move into assisted living. So some of the downsides is certainly the cost can be higher than renting, an apartment in a private condo building. There may be less privacy than in a regular condo or a home, and someone may need to relocate if care needs increase. And like I said, sometimes that means just moving into the other ward or section of the retirement home. So it can be a very good option for people who think they may need more significant care down the road, but aren't ready to sort of make that dive quite yet. The rents can go anywhere from 3,500 to 6,000. Again, these are often rented apartments where you would rent from the retirement home itself and be, again, subject to the Landlord Tenant Act, just like you would be in a regular condo. The second type of retirement home living is certainly assisted living. And this is often what we think of when we think about retirement homes. So this is living right in the unit, needing things like personal care, medication management, potentially daily assistance around movement or showering or those sorts of things. So it could work for seniors who may need some extra support down the line, but want to have some care available. So the range in assisted living is quite wide. And again, like I said, we'll talk a lot more about that in our next webinar in May. But it does allow people to have access to that medical support. So things like I said, bathing, dressing, meds, there is 24-hour staff available for emergencies. And so there's often nurses or doctors on staff that are in-house, but also just they are very accustomed to people potentially needing help at 2 a.m. So there's a very high level of security and safety that comes with these homes. Meals, housekeeping, and activities are included. So when we talked a bit about aging in place, one of the biggest downsides is this fear of isolation, the risk of isolation. And that is one of the things that comes with these, when you find the right fit of a retirement home, the activities that happen, there are pretty much everything under the sun in terms of games, exercise, outings that happen right within the center. And there's always people around, which is really, really nice. Some of the cons, which I think are the biggest one that's pretty obvious, is that these often they come at a cost. So if someone needs full-time nursing care, the cost can become pretty comparable if you need full-time nursing care at home versus moving into one of these homes. And so the cost is just built into it. There is obviously less personal space, and if needs increase, there's often, not always, have certain homes that have memory care available and some homes that don't. And so really making sure that are picking the right home will be important questions to ask, again, if memory care is something that someone might need. The cost can go anywhere from 4,500 upwards of 7,500, depending on the level of care per month. And again, even the different types of homes, and these are private homes that I'm talking about, obviously have different levels of care available and different price points. So this is Stella. Stella is living in a bungalow in Mississauga, but struggles with her mobility. She's 81 years old, and her income is about $4,200 a month through CPP, OAS, and a private pension. So she really needs help with medication, meals, personal care, but wants to stay as independent as possible. She decides with a budget of $5,000 to $6,500 a month through her savings is that she is going to move into a retirement home. So she sells her home for $1 million and moves in with assisted living at $5,500 a month. Her meals, housekeeping, laundry, and the staff assistance is included, so she doesn't have as many personal expenses. And she uses both the guaranteed income supplement and the Ontario Drug Program to help with some of her costs, and keeps the home sale from the profit about $300,000 to $500,000 invested for the future and other needs that she may need down the road. Again, $5,500 to $6,500 is her fees and her other costs of living. So that's how much she's spending a month, which is nothing to balk at. That's a lot of money, certainly. But it really works for seniors that need that daily support and may want to maintain some level of independence. So one resource that I just want to flag for everybody is the Retirement Homes Regulatory Authority. And this is a really a database in Ontario that's searchable that will help people who are considering retirement homes to look at, how big it is, what they offer, if there has been any regulatory issues in the past, and what their licensing might be, all of those things. So this is a really great resource for anyone considering. There's often also some private companies that help decide which ones might be for you. So there are some services available that I'm happy to share around helping you evaluate which retirement home out of the many will work best for your specific needs. So this gives you a really good cursory overview, but there are services available at no cost to people. I think they get paid through the retirement homes in the end, but to understand what is available and to give you an overview of what options you might have. Next up, we're going to talk about multi-generational living. And what this means is moving in with either adult children, with relatives. And this might be something that works for people who want to have family time and have the relationship with those relatives that allows for living together, which is not easy. But there's a lot of pros to it. There's a lot of really positives that come from generational living. You can still get in-home care. Sorry, could you go back one? Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. So there are a lot of benefits to doing this because it really does allow for some of that support available in the home. So we're going to talk about Nina. Nina's 74 years old. She's renting, but she is considering moving in with her daughter. She gets $2,200 a month through CPP and OAS, and she prefers to live with family, but needs some independence. So her budget of how much she can spend is about $1,500 a month. So Nina decides it's time to move in with her daughter. The daughter renovates the basement for Nina using the seniors home safety tax credit. So this is really a 25% rebate from the Ontario government on the $10,000 of renovations on the first $10,000. And the big thing is they have a big discussion on things like on boundaries, on costs, on cooking, on how she's going to handle dealing with grandkids and how they're going to do business with her, and just generally how we're going to live together. So she agrees to contribute somewhere between $1,000 $2,000 to her daughter to help out with the cost of living, with the house expenses. And this really works for someone who has a strong family network, wants to benefit from some of the cost savings. And, there's an ability to maybe modify the home, which gave Nina still some separate space. So things like, having their own kitchen or having a separate bathroom, living area is really important, if that's something that is required with the family dynamic. And again, every family is different. And so this certainly does not work for everybody, but is a great option if it does. One of the things that often people think about is moving to a smaller home. And so this would mean potentially selling, or leaving a house like I sort of described my parents having, the 4-bedroom home, the room, with the empty rooms that are no longer making sense, and wanting to maintain the feel of a home. So condos feel uncomfortable. Moving in with family might feel uncomfortable. Moving into a retirement home could feel uncomfortable. And so one thing people often consider is, I have this $1.5 million home. I want to release some of that equity. I also want to get the benefit of living in a smaller space and reducing my maintenance. So moving to a smaller home becomes a very appealing option. This stat on here, average age for knee or hip replacement surgery is 67 in Canada, which, I say that because there are some downsides to this, and I'm going to talk about some of those are related to those knee and hip replacements. The pros, like I said, there is, you're continuing to build equity. If you buy a smaller home, you're still benefiting from the improvements and appreciation of the real estate market and building your equity in the home itself. Often these homes, whether it's a townhouse or a bungalow, have more space than a condo. And some of them, like a townhouse condo, for example, where you have the feeling of a house, often have much lesser condo fees than an apartment, and include things like snow removal, garbage removal, and some of the benefits of those condo fees, gardening, shoveling, mowing the lawn, those sorts of things are sometimes included in those condo fees. So you get that outdoor space without needing to do the full maintenance of the yard. Some people definitely feel a sense of independence by moving in to one of these smaller homes. Like I said, a bungalow, a condo townhouse, those are very popular. And so they still have a little bit of that independence. The biggest downside, I would say, is this often can be temporary, and that comes back to those hip replacement, knee replacements. Often these, particularly condo townhouses, are very tall and narrow, right? So whether it's a semi-detached or like I said, these tall 2 to 3 story condo townhouses often have a lot of stairs. And in my experience, knees don't get stronger over time. And so, if mobility is an issue, it could mean that this is really only a temporary move. And that can often feel, I would say, a little bit less predictable, or still feel like we haven't made that final downsize yet. And so sometimes, depending on the situation, I really encourage people to think about maybe having a stopgap in place is not the best option. Maybe having something that is sustainable for a longer future. And so, while a condo townhouse might look really good right now and really fit your needs and really give you all the benefits that you're looking for, the downside is that it may not last, for more than 5 years. And moving takes a toll on everybody of every age. And so really thinking about not just today, but 5 to 10 years down the future is really important when we're going through this process. There are costs, so 2,500 to 6,000, depending again on whether or not there's a mortgage, again, paying for maintenance or condo fees, utilities, taxes, and potentially in-home care. We're going to talk a little bit about shared living or co-housing. Some of you may have not heard of this before. It's really where seniors either share a home, so friends come together, or there's a community that's built around this. And these aren't super common in Ontario, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but these really work well for, let's say, a couple of friends who are in a similar situation and want to get back to college days where we room together. And the reasons is that it's really cost effective to do together. You're getting that built-in social support. And there's, again, related to costs, shared expenses around utilities and maintenance. The downside is similar to those with multi-generational living. Boundaries are really important in a situation like this. There's a lot less privacy. You really need to make sure that the people you might be doing this with, the housemates, are that there's a lot of compatibility there and there's an understanding of how people function. And sometimes it's a bit harder to find a home that's going to fit these needs. And so there are some options, and this is becoming more popular as housing costs continue to increase. But even this can cost anywhere from $1,500 to $3,500 a month, depending on whether it's rent or potentially a mortgage and living expenses. This is a summary of some of the financial assistance programs that I spoke about. Um, One little caveat I will give is sometimes these do change, particularly around times where we have changes in government in Ontario. So I just want to give that sort of heads up that these are all dependent also on, again, who's in the house in Toronto, in Queens Park, that's the word. And also that different, not everyone qualifies, and these things change from time to time, but I will share this with you in your email tomorrow. These really talk about some of the programs that do currently exist, who qualifies for them, what the benefits are, and how to apply. And some of them are simply through your income tax return, so your accountant can certainly help through that. And some are through things like Service Canada, and some things happen automatically. So I will provide you with this in the email tomorrow as well. So, like I said, I am going to send you an email tomorrow with the recording of this presentation, a link so that you can have all these slides. You will get the checklist that I shared at the beginning. Is it time to right size? And as always, I'll be looking for your feedback, and everyone who gives feedback will be entered into a draw for a Tim's gift card. You'll also have the chance to register for our next webinar, which is in May. May 21st, and we will be digging into specifically retirement homes. We're just going to go back and we're going to get into some of the Q&A, but our next webinar, sorry, here we are. Ask me anything about retirement homes. And so we're going to have an expert guest from Amica Senior Lifestyle, May 21st from 7 to 8. I will be here, and Sonia Oja will be here as well to talk to us about different, not just Amica, but be able to answer. She will be able to answer a lot of your questions that you may have about retirement homes and Amica specifically as well. So you can scan the code if you have your phone handy, if you're not using it right now, and scan the QR code if you'd like to sign up. And you can also look out for that in the email tomorrow. So back to the Q&A, there's a couple of questions that have already come in. And if you haven't already and have a question, please feel free to pop it in the chat, in the Q&A, and I'll try to answer it. So the first question that came in that says, what is the condo reserve fund? So really popular question as people are considering a condo. Like I said before, owners are responsible for the condo fees, but they're also responsible for what's called a reserve fund. So every condo management or condo corporation, I should say, in Ontario has a pool of money that is considered their reserve fund. So it is this backup piece of money that's used in case there's a large expense that comes up. So for example, the parking lot, something needs to happen. Many condos had some issues with the flood that happened last summer. And so the condo reserve fund is used to pay for some of those big unforeseen expenses. And so one of the things that's really important when we're buying a condo is to look at the health of that reserve fund. So if you've ever bought a condo before, you know you had a child or someone you know buy a condo apartment, one of the things that's crucial before buying it is doing what's called a status certificate check. And so the status certificate includes any liens or any payments that are on the actual unit, but it also gives us a sense of how healthy that reserve fund is. And the reason you want it really healthy is because if one of those big unforeseen circumstances arises, we would want to make sure that there's enough funds in there to pay for that. And otherwise, the owners are going to be responsible for contributing. So really important that before we buy any condo, that a lawyer reviews that condo certificate and make sure that, it's in good health. All right, we have another question. How much do condo fees go up each year? So great question. Those are not actually regulated in the same way. And again, that condo reserve fund is really going to give us an indication of how much those fees could go up. That's one of the downsides of condominium ownership, is that all owners are responsible for any payments that are required. So, if the reserve fund is not something they want to dig into, sometimes there's something called a special assessment where owners all give a big chunk of money, but those condo fees also play a part in that. So condo fees can go up, anywhere from, 5% up to, I've seen upwards of 10% or even more than that. So that important step, if you're buying a condo, is to do the due diligence of having a lawyer review the status certificate to make sure that there's some health there. Sorry, one more question coming in. How often can you use senior tax credits? So again, these are really dependent on a case-by-case basis. Some of them are consistent that you can claim them every year on your tax return. So they can be used again and again. Some of them are really dependent on how much income you have. So often, as would be clear, the higher the income, sometimes people don't qualify. So really understanding, which ones make sense for you would really be dependent on, again, specific circumstances, what you're looking to do, and then also what your income is. Certain ones, like the modifications, are dependent on, like, there's often requirements or almost prescriptions needed from in-home care services or someone to make that assessment that you require, let's say, a chairlift. So if you were getting a chairlift, you probably only get that chairlift once. But again, it's really dependent on a case-by-case basis. All right, just checking. All right, so we are I think we're just going to start one quick poll before we continue. What aspect of moving from your current home concerns you the most? So if everyone could just grab into their poll, if anyone sees it, I just want to. The options are the logistics of the moving process, the cost of moving, leaving my very comfortable community, or leaving my house that has so many memories. So if you think about moving from your current home, what is the thing that really concerns you the most? All right. So it looks like, I'm just going to publish that, the logistics of the moving process. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. Part of that might be also the deciding process. And that's why we started with this today, is because, really getting a sense of, where will I go? And, I have given you a ton of information, so I understand if, hopefully no one feels more confused than they did before. But what I hope everyone understands, or at least took away from today, is that there are a lot of options. And that can be a very overwhelming thing. The paradox of choice can be very difficult to deal with. But I think what I hope you're able to take away is that there are things that are suited for every every personal situation. The second thing I would hope you take away is that you're here today. You took an hour of your night because you want to plan for the future. And I think thinking 5 years, like I said, 10 years in the future is really, really critical. Sometimes people really look at just, what suits me today. And unfortunately, we need to anticipate some of our changing needs as we get older. And so, I think part of what these logistics of this moving process is that trying to understand, what my options are and what makes most sense for me. The other part, the actual moving process, what the reason I created seamless right sizing is because getting rid of the stuff, packing it, moving it, selling the house, staging the house, all that stuff is very overwhelming. And my hope is that, engaging and helping people with that part can take some of the overwhelm. There's still a lot of work to be done, no matter what, no matter how much help we have. And some of those decisions and logistics certainly can be I'm trying to think of the right word, can feel like a lot, and they are a lot. And so my goal is really to help ease that process as much as possible as people make one of these really big moves. We will be having a number of upcoming webinars. Like I said, May 21st will be our next one where we're talking specifically about retirement homes, but the following will be in your email. The following webinars will be in your email tomorrow, that list. And I already have someone talking about aging in place and the safety things that you might want to consider, who will be our following guest. And so if you have any ideas about other guests you'd love to see on here, please let me know. But I do want to thank you all for being here. We are going to run a draw for those once we figure out who was interested in those Scepters tickets, and those will be included in your email tomorrow. I want to thank you again all for being here and for the questions you provided. You know how to get a hold of me, and you'll be able to respond to that email, but you can look out for the presentation, the video, the checklist, and a number of other resources in your email tomorrow. All right, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.